Joining me to discuss this is the New South Wales Treasurer Dominic Perrottet. Welcome to the program.
Good evening, Sharri. Thanks.
Now, just how worried are all the treasurers and how worried were they all at Friday's meeting about this triple whammy of the coronavirus, the drought and the bushfire recovery effort?
Look, I think it's a significant concern. It's probably at the top of the list, and particularly, as you say, off the back of drought, bushfires, New South Wales floods as well. But look, it's early days in respect of the economic impacts of the coronavirus here in New South Wales. I think probably the eastern seaboard states are more broadly affected, particularly with our reliance on educational exports and our trading relationship with China. I've recently met with the Vice-Chancellors of the universities in New South Wales to see how any assistance they need at the moment. But look, obviously they're working through the challenges they face. But we'll just see how it plays out, particularly if we start to see the ban soon to be lifted. In
New South Wales, what are the latest figures? What's your modelling showing you on just how big the impact to our economy is going to be?
Well, we probably expect early days, but a reduction in our economic growth by about a third of a percentage point to 2/3. And obviously in circumstances where we've had drought and fires, that's going to be significant. But let's not forget here that the New South Wales economy is incredibly resilient and strong. Our public investment in infrastructure is adding about half percentage point to economic growth. Following the bushfires, where we've now committed $1 billion in infrastructure investment, it will be close to $1 billion, I would expect, in clean-up support as well. That will help over time stimulate those economies and get them back on track. And the AAA,
Just in terms of when you say that is going to be a significant hit, how much is that going to affect the budget bottom line?
Well, I've said, we updated our half-yearly numbers in December last year, and we updated our surplus to $700 million for 19-20.
Will it wipe out the surplus?
Look, the position I've made, and I said we're early days at this moment, that we're going to put people before numbers here, and my focus as Treasurer is to provide the support to the emergency services.
Is that a concern of yours, that it could erode that $700 million surplus?
Sharri, as Treasurer, I get concerned about a lot of things, but my pure focus at the moment, as we start the budget preparation, is to make sure we have as much financial support on the ground as possible. Whether it's the $2 billion in drought support we've given, it's probably going to be close to $2 billion over a period of time for support for emergency services.
So you'll give whatever support's necessary, even if it does mean that the surplus is eroded?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is, we don't run surpluses in New South Wales for the sake of it. We run surpluses and have strong financial management so we can provide the support where it's needed. And off the back of all of that, Moody's and S&P, the rating agencies, have backed in our AAA credit rating. Our jobs growth continues to be strong in New South Wales. Our unemployment rate is at 4.5%. That's almost 1 percentage point lower than the next best state in Victoria. So the fundamentals in our economy in New South Wales remain strong, and we want to make sure we have the financial capacity to continue to invest where it matters.
I understand that the Queensland government has written to the federal government requesting that the National Disaster Recovery Account apply to the coronavirus as well, so that the impact and the cost of this would be split 50-50 between the states and the federal government. Is that something that you would also consider writing to Canberra about?
Look, I'm happy to look at that. I know the Queensland Treasurer Jackie Tradd has done that, and I think there probably needs to be a broader discussion following the reviews into the bushfire crisis about how that federal national recovery account operates. And
whether it would apply to the coronavirus.
Yeah, and what constitutes a disaster that would qualify for state and federal joint funding arrangements. So that's something we should look at. At this stage, I would say it's too early for us to be engaged in that discussion. We are completely focused on the cleanup of the bushfires.
I mean, at the end of the day, it was the feds who decided to stop flights from China.
Yeah, and that's right. And they have information, and their number one priority should be to keep Australians safe. But there's no doubt there will be economic impacts off the back of that decision, whether that's in educational exports with Chinese. The timing, particularly with the start of the education semester, couldn't be worse. But it's also tourism off the back of that. For every Chinese student that comes into New South Wales, 1 in 4 brings their parents out over the course of the year. So these are challenges coming our way. I think it's probably too early to be writing to the Commonwealth, but I do think we should look at how that national disaster account operates and probably get some clarity in relation to the issues that it should cover.
In case you do need it. Look, on the education sector, there's been some calls for compensation to be provided to the universities if you know, the semester is significantly delayed. Do you think this is something that should be considered?
Well, not at this stage. I mean, I've had discussions, as I said, with the Vice-Chancellors already. Our focus at the moment is whatever we can do to work with them to ensure that as many international students from China are able to participate in this year's educational year. So that's where our focus is. You know, we've provided obviously financial support for small businesses who've been affected by the bushfires and drought and the like. Whether we extend that to education remains to be seen, but our focus this stage is to make sure that they've got the support.
So there could be state funding then for that sector if it's...
Well, I mean, I wouldn't see it at this point, Sharri. And when you look at the support that we're giving at the moment for drought and bushfires, I think that's clearly where our focus is. Yeah.
Look, just before we move off this topic, what can people do? I mean, instead of, you know, there's this sense that we're continually talking down the economy. How can everyone help to make sure that we don't slide into a recession?
Well, as I said, the New South Wales economy remains incredibly strong. We're the engine room of the nation, and but there's no doubt, whether it's the North Coast and the South Coast, some of our communities who have been affected by drought and by bushfires need support. So, you know, we're running a Visit New South Wales campaign, and for those who are looking at holidays over the course of the year, you know, I was down in the South Coast in Mogo on Thursday last week, and we want to help those communities get back on their feet as quickly as possible.
Spending money locally as much as possible.
Spend locally, buy from the bush. That's what we should be doing here in the state, and I encourage anybody who's tuning into the show to listen. Yeah.
Now, look, while the Treasurers are so worried and concerned and having discussions about the economy, running right alongside this is a push to get to a net zero emissions target by 2050, that you have that aspirational target in New South Wales, and now Anthony Albanese has come out federally and said this should be the aim. Matthias Cormann this morning said that, you know, this was potentially reckless. Do you think this could jeopardise the prosperity of Australia?
Well, I think what you have when it comes to emissions targets and climate change policy is a lot of rhetoric and not enough policy follow-through. We have an aspirational target, as you say, in New South Wales. We have a number of initiatives, and we want to make sure that we move to a renewable future in a way that's economically sustainable, financially responsible, and at the same time secures our baseload power into the future.
Is that even possible to do that?
Well, we're working. That's the difference, I think, between having an aspirational target, where I believe the majority of Australians are, and making it a legal requirement when you haven't got the policy follow-through. The challenge for the Labor Party at the moment, I believe, is they're trying to be all things to all people. They're trying to be one thing to the people of Newcastle, the same thing, another thing to the people of Newtown.
Can our economy continue to prosper if we have net zero emissions by 2050? I'm asking you this as the Treasurer.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of work to do in order to get us in that position. But at the same time, we've got to make sure that we have the policy settings to deliver it. And at the moment, I haven't seen that. But it is something that the states and the national government should work on. Here in New South Wales, we are short on the rhetoric, because if you look at our emissions reduction since 2000...
Well, that's a good point. I mean, you said it, but you guys haven't outlined either at a state level how you would get to this aspirational target of net zero.
Well, if you look where the run's on the board, we've reduced our emissions since 2005 at a greater rate than the Labor states of Queensland, Victoria, Western Australia combined. So that is an aspirational target for us. But when you have Anthony Albanese out there with a legal requirement and saying they're going to work back from that, you know, at the same one day they're out there touring coal-fired power stations in Newcastle, the next day they're at Extinction Rebellion rallies. You can't be all things to all people, and I think Australians see through that.
Within your government, there is also an attempt to be all things to all people. You've got one arm of the government pushing for more hazard reduction after the bushfires, and another arm saying, no, the priority is emissions. What do you think the priority is?
Well, they're not mutually...
To make sure that this horror bushfire season doesn't happen again.
Well, both those areas are not mutually exclusive. We're doing a review in relation to that. There's no doubt that whether it's hazard reduction, looking at the impacts of climate change on our state and the policies that come off the back of it are crucial and important. And let's also acknowledge the fact that this bushfire season has come off the back of a significant period of drought. The state is still 99% in drought.
Do you think the Department of Environment failed by not conducting enough hazard reduction?
Look, I think that's... it's way too early to make those assessments because there are challenges.
They didn't even meet their targets.
Yeah, and there may be good reasons as to why. And I think what will come through these reviews is we'll get some information in relation to what happened, why it happened, and ways in which we can improve going forward. And that's at a state level, a federal level, right across the board. But this shouldn't turn into a blame game. We should be looking at constructive ways in which we can mitigate against these natural disasters, whether that's short-term or long-term measures.
Well, speaking of the blame game, this morning on Sky, Andrew Clennell raised a story that he had where he said there was a dispute about the federal-state contribution where Scott Morrison disputed whether New South Wales was entitled to 50% of the clean-up cost of the fires. How heated was this dispute? And how much did you have to fight to get that money from the feds?
Look, I'm not going to get into private discussions we have with the federal government. I have very constructive and robust debates.
There was a dispute over this.
Oh, look, we've had constructive discussions over the course of the bushfire season. I have constructive discussions with the Federal Treasurer in relation to financial arrangements all the time.
On this point, was there a dispute over whether Scott Morrison wanted to contribute 50% of the funds?
Well, I would say that no. I think if you look at it, there was constructive, robust financial arrangements and issues that I raised and the Premier raised with the federal government. And I think what's most important is we landed in the right spot, and that is that we want to ensure that these homes and these communities are back on their feet as quickly as possible.
You landed in the right spot because you and Josh Frydenberg had to sort it out because because Premier and the Prime Minister weren't speaking?
No, that's not right. We had a constructive discussion from the outset to ensure that we had the funding available at both the state and federal level to help these communities get back on their feet. There were issues that needed to be worked out behind the scenes. We worked through those issues and we landed in a place that I think was quite appropriate in a way that ensures that we get all communities who have been fire affected on their feet as quickly as possible.
Treasurer, just lastly, I wrote a column in yesterday's Daily Telegraph, and also there was a similar topic on the front page of the Financial Review.
Yeah.
Just we've had all these companies embroiled in underpayment scandals. But the flip side is that the IR legislation, the award system is just too complicated for any company to decipher, and there's no way that any company can confidently say they are paying the correct rate because it's so arbitrary. And even if you get advice from Fair Work Australia, that advice isn't binding. This is a problem because for the economy and for New South Wales, because it means that companies are reluctant to hire more people than is necessary. Adam Crichton in my piece said that it's one of the reasons why our unemployment rate is higher than the UK and the US. While this is clearly the federal sphere, do you think that this is an area where there should be reform?
Well, let's start with the premise that anyone who's entitled to their wage should receive it. And I think if you look at some of the anecdotal evidence, you've had people who, yes, have been underpaid, but you've also had people who've been overpaid as well. I think what the federal government should be careful of is not creating a greater problem than the one that they're trying to solve, because government departments and agencies will always come up with ideas of increasing red tape, increasing regulation and making it more difficult for businesses. The more you do that, the greater the cost to businesses off the back of it, and then what you will then see is lower wages and less employment. So there's a fine balance that needs to be undertaken here, and you wouldn't want to see the federal government just jump at this issue in a way that's not responsible, because if you do increase...
Do you think that's what they're doing now?
I'm concerned. Well, I'm concerned that they are, because the more you increase regulation on businesses, the more investment that needs to be made, and then costs increase off the back of that.
Should they be simplifying the IR system and the award rate and the EBAs?
Well, they're probably, it's a challenging area, as we've seen in the past, in relation to industrial relations reform, but there is no doubt that we have one of the more inefficient systems globally, and that's something that obviously I would encourage them to look at. But at the same time, this is not about ensuring workers don't get a good wage. Workers should receive the wage that they're entitled to. What you don't want to see is government increase red tape and regulation that ends up having the perverse result they're looking for.